While you're being bombarded with pictures and headlines of President Trump's visit to Great Britain, the real story, the one terrifying the British more than anything else in the world, is unfolding behind the scenes. And it has everything to do with U.S.-Russian relations. And it's a major driver of the unprecedented level of desperation we're witnessing from London's imperial apparatus, a desperation which manifested itself most dramatically in the assassination of Charlie Kirk last week. This assassination was not just a function of left-wing propaganda advocating violence. It was that, and as Barbara outlined on Monday, it's part of a full-spectrum information warfare run by intelligence agencies ranging from Britain to NATO. But what it shows is the desperation of the British imperial system that sees its centuries-old domination crumbling before Trump's new strategic alignment with Russia. But what the empire doesn't understand is that this terror campaign will only expose more and more of their apparatus and the underlying ideology and philosophy which drives it. I'm Susan Kokinda, and I've been fighting not only the economic and strategic policies of this British imperial system for decades, but I've studied the philosophical underpinnings of it, and I know how to defeat it. So tonight we're going to show you just exactly how Trump is doing that and how you can help. And if you appreciate the deeper picture which we provide you each week, please like and subscribe to our channel. So in this week's update, I'm going to cover Trump's real dialogue, which is with Russia, not Britain, the networks behind the Kirk assassination, which are now under direct scrutiny, and why the oligarchy hated both Charlie Kirk and Socrates. So yes, Trump is in Britain as this is being recorded. There's going to be lots of pomp and circumstance and nice diplomatic words, but let's look at the real state of Britain, which Trump knows all too well. Britain remains a major force in keeping the Ukraine war going. So just this week, Boris Johnson called for NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the British government is abolishing free speech at home. People are being arrested for social media posts. But look at the response. Millions of people on the streets of London last Saturday protesting this decrepit regime. And let's not forget, the British economy is collapsing along with much of the rest of Europe under the weight of their own insane ideologies. So while he's having dinner with the king, don't forget that Donald Trump knows all of this. And you're going to see plenty of pictures of carriages and castles. But here's what the media is desperately trying to block out: Trump's quiet, deepening dialogue with Russia. Listen to J.D. Vance last week talking about economic cooperation with Russia at a very unprecedented level.
Sources have told me that Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested that sanctions relief could result in Russia moving more of their energy commodities in the U.S. dollar, functionally giving Russia and the United States a lot of control over U.S. energy markets. That could lower energy costs for Americans. Do you see economic cooperation with Russia as one of the things that could bring an end to some of the hostilities that we want to see concluded?
Yeah, Matt, absolutely. And it's one of the carrots that we've thrown out there. And the president's been very open with both the Europeans and the Russians that he doesn't see any reason why we should economically isolate Russia except for the continuation of the conflict. He wants the killing to stop. And then on the other side of peace, he's very open to a whole host of economic arrangements that are beneficial to the United States of America. I mean, let's be honest, whether you like or dislike Russia, whether you agree or disagree with their underlying arguments for the conflict, the simple fact is they've got a lot of oil, they've got a lot of gas, they've got a lot of mineral wealth. And I think the president is absolutely right that once we get this peace settled, we could have a very productive economic relationship with both Russia and Ukraine in the future.
Now, the establishment went absolutely hysterical about this. The Daily Kos shrieked about Putin pawns. The Hill came up with this article, quoting a Republican senator who wanted to be unnamed, I can imagine why, who expressed frustration over Trump's failure to move on sanctions and said that he's sick of Trump and Vance's love affair with Putin. Now, of course, Trump called Europe's bluff on sanctions last week. He deflected all the pressure on him to sanction Russia by demanding that the Europeans stop buying oil and natural gas from Russia. He exposed their hypocrisy in keeping the war going while maintaining their own economic ties with Russia. And in the meantime, the Trump administration is continuing to shift its relationship to Russia and Russia's close allies. The U.S. just sent military observers to Russian Belarus military exercises. This has plenty of people freaked out, as this Reuters headline reflects. And Trump is also moving to reopen diplomatic ties with Belarus, which is one of Russia's closest allies. And again, you're going to get hysterical reaction from the Europeans because they don't want peace. They want war. Little Denmark, a fellow monarchy of the British, just announced $9 billion in air defense purchases as tensions with Russia grow. Because they see what we see. Two sovereign nations which the British have spent many, many decades in trying to keep apart and are now moving into closer alignment. Add to that the fact that Trump is close to negotiating a trade deal with China, and Trump just sent very warm birthday greetings to India's Modi, and you get an idea of just how desperate the British Empire is. Because they have started pretty much every major war in the past 30 years to prevent these kinds of alliances between great nations who are acting on their own sovereign interests. So don't get caught up in the media extravaganza about Trump's visit to Britain. This is what's really going on. And if you want to stay focused on the real battle unfolding, not the media version of one, go to our website and subscribe to the Promethean Action newsletter. Now, when the empire gets desperate, they get murderous. And last week, Charlie Kirk was the victim of that. But that is pulling more of the enemy's apparatus out into the open. And the Trump administration has declared war in it, taking particular aim at groups like the Ford Foundation, George Soros' Open Society Foundation, and the whole constellation of subversive NGOs. In particular, there's a growing emphasis on the role of violent transgender groups and where they come from. One group which is being looked at is the Armed Queers of Salt Lake. Well, where they come from is not a big secret. The funding from the Ford Foundation and Soros' Open Society and others is right there on the record for everybody to see. Analyst Mike Benz added a new element in an interview today where he laid out how the USAID had been funding transgender movements for their use in color revolutions around the world. Benz said, "You have this transgender global affinity network that the State Department, USAID, and intelligence agencies have been working with, especially since the end of the Cold War. Well, USAID has been shut down, but we still have the role of the foundations to deal with." And J.D. Vance, who broadcast the Charlie Kirk show from his office on Monday, made clear the gloves are off. When he talked about a Nation magazine piece which justified Charlie Kirk's assassination, Vance took dead aim the Ford Foundation and Soros' Open Society.
There is no unity with the people who celebrate Charlie Kirk's assassination. And there is no unity with the people who fund these articles, who pay the salaries of these terrorist sympathizers, who argue that Charlie Kirk, a loving husband and father, deserved a shot to the neck because he spoke words with which they disagree. Did you know that the George Soros Open Society Foundation and the Ford Foundation, the groups who funded that disgusting article justifying Charlie's death, do you know they benefit from generous tax treatment? They are literally subsidized by you and me, the American taxpayer.
So let me focus on George Soros and the Soros Foundation for a moment. Many are familiar with his political and economic activity. I mean, he's the poster boy for globalization, one world government, green fascism, the whole apparatus. But I want to focus on the philosophy, because that's where the real battle is being fought out. Soros was basically trained by Sir Karl Popper, an Austrian who moved to Great Britain. Soros' Open Society concept came from the title of one of Popper's books. Popper mentored influentials on both sides, Soros on the one hand, various Austrian school economists on the other, in a typical British gang-counter-gang operation. But I want to focus on one particular aspect of Popper's philosophy. It's his absolute hatred of Plato, and his argument that Plato was a totalitarian. Why this hatred? Because Plato believed in universal principles, and that those principles are discoverable by the human mind. This is antithetical to everything that the British system represents. Where did Plato come from? He was a student of Socrates. Plato was 29 years old when Socrates was executed by the Democratic Party of Athens. And Socrates, like Charlie Kirk, had a passion for freeing the youth of his society from the false and failing ideologies which he knew would destroy Athens. So he was arrested by the Democratic Party and executed. They couldn't tolerate someone who taught people to think for themselves, to question the prevailing narratives, to discover truth through reason. But Plato picked up the mantle, and he provided us with his powerful dialogues which have helped shape the course of Western civilization. What we're witnessing right now is nothing less than the final battle between two completely different visions of humanity's future. On the one side, you have the British imperial system and their philosophical descendants, who believe that truth is unknowable, that human beings are just animals to be manipulated, and that power is the only reality. On the other hand, you have Trump's America, working with sovereign nations like Russia, proving that countries can cooperate based on mutual respect and universal principles of sovereignty and development. This terrifies the British because it exposes their entire system as a fraud. Charlie Kirk's crime was the same as Socrates. He was teaching young Americans to think, to question, to discover the truth about their country and their potential. He was freeing them from the ideological programming that passes for education in our universities. But the Empire's terror campaign is backfiring. Every desperate move they make, from funding violent groups to maintaining the Ukraine war, only exposes more of their networks and drives Trump closer to the alliance of sovereign nations they've spent centuries trying to prevent. The British Empire is dying, and the real United States is awakening. Plato carried forward Socrates' mission. We all have a mission to carry forward, and Promethean Action is playing its role. So subscribe to our channel, become a member of Promethean Action, and join the fight for America's philosophical independence. The future of human civilization depends on it. This has been your midweek update. Thanks for watching.